We're going to get going again. Amy Johnson is co-founder and partner of 22eleven, an Omaha consulting firm that helps software as a service or SaaS and other companies with everything from idea development to growth modeling, fundraising and sales and marketing strategies. Amy previously co-founded LifeLoop, an Omaha company with a senior living technology platform that was acquired in 2022 by Vista Private Equity. During her time at LifeLoop, Amy was named Entrepreneur of the Year in Omaha. The company was recognized by Inc. magazine as one of the fastest growing companies in the Midwest and received several awards for company culture. Previously, Amy spent 11 years in the insurance industry, focusing on sales, marketing, and account management. She has an undergraduate degree in family and consumer science from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Amy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Congratulations on your successful exit with LifeLoop.
Thank
Let's
you.
start with a question about that company. During the 8 years you ran it, you didn't have one employee leave. Tell us about how you built that culture.
Yeah, and I guess I should clarify, we didn't have one employee leave on their own.
I was trying to find that phrase. Thank you.
I mean, there was, there was only a couple that left altogether. But in terms of building the culture, I think it really started with hiring the right people, which is a whole probably session in its own. But really understanding people's goals and why they're joining the company, along with like a clear direction of where we were going as a company, was kind of the key component to building the right culture. But then, culture is a pretty big buzzword. I look at it more as, do you have a environment of trust where people not only trust you as a leader, but each other? And so fostering an environment where people feel like their voice is heard, that they have each other's backs. That is a daily thing, that there's a lot of tactics that went into that. And a lot of it ultimately was me just fostering the environment and letting them do their jobs.
And right from the beginning, I mean, a lot of these universities are dealing with very early stage startups. You got to get that stuff right away, right?
Yeah, and the recruiting is such a big part of it. When you're a startup, there's a lot of red tape, and finding people that want to be a part of a startup is a different type of personality. And then what they value and what is important to them, a lot of people think, oh, it's money or it's flexibility. Everybody is joining a company for a different reason. And so it's really critical to understand from day one what that reason is to that person, and then making sure that thread is consistently revisited throughout their time with you as a company. So if they value purpose, it's making sure that they feel like they're getting purpose out of their day. If they value flexibility, it's understanding what that looks like and how that fits into their role. So it is a lot of work because it's very personal. But you get all of those little components that then build up to an overall, what I would refer to as team mindfulness. It's, as you grow, being mindful as a team, what is needed next. And, it ultimately started with self-awareness. That was my number one value at LifeLoop. I truly value self-awareness, like being very aware of what I wasn't good at is what my first hire had to be really good at, and so on and so on and so on. So always being aware of where the gaps are and the skills was a big part of building the right culture.
One more kind of early startup question, because a lot of these university people who work with startups, one of the big things is what kind of money to take and when to take it and how much equity to give up. LifeLoop made a deliberate decision not to take a lot of venture capital funding. Why and how did you fund the company without taking a lot of venture capital?
Yeah, I mean, the decision was really, there was a lot that went into it. It was time, in the early days, it's like, how much time would it take me to go raise money versus could I just go sell product and move the needle? And I was better at selling product at the time than raising money. When you have no revenue, it's hard to raise money. So I just went and got revenue instead. And so that was one piece of it. The other piece of it was, how fast is the market you're in going to move? How realistic is it that taking a large sum of money makes sense? For us, it just came down to we wanted to be profitable and we wanted to have the option to continue to build a company if we didn't exit, and so what did that look like? And so it did require a lot more personal risk. My husband and I took on a lot of things that maybe some people, don't want to or have that risk threshold. I didn't take a salary, which I don't recommend. I didn't do that for quite a while, but that allowed us to hire the right talent, getting a line of credit, those sort of things. Taking the money from the right people was really big for me. I wanted partners. I didn't want, people to think they had a large voice in something that was just because they wrote a check. So we were very deliberate on who we took money from.
After you sold LifeLoop, you formed 2211, which, the other speakers we've had here today run programs that universities can plug into. You're different. 2211 is a
Yeah.
consulting firm, but we thought that would be a great contrast to some of these programs. What made you decide to start this consulting firm called 2211?
When we exited, I had a lot of people just asking for help. And so to be totally honest, initially it was just a place to put things like where can I be helpful? But as I got into it, I realized, I maybe understood more than I thought. When you're in it day to day, you're just kind of running around really with your head cut off when you're running a startup. But when I took a step back, I was like, oh, I really do know how to go from 0 to 1. And specifically, it's very obvious to me where there's talent gaps, where, people, companies get told a lot of things like what they should do. You get a lot of advice, and sometimes it's just hearing it from somebody to be like, no, you're fine. You can just, you don't have to go raise a bunch of money. Or if you want to go raise a bunch of money, that's fine. But you need to make sure you have these other pieces in place. And so it was always very obvious to me. And so where my niche really has become is like, a 60 to 90-day engagement. Startups don't have a ton of money. They shouldn't be paying consultants a lot of money. If you're a startup, it's just, to me, that can be a little bit of a red flag. And so it's 60, 90 days of like, here is a very obvious gap. You are on the right path, some reassurance, and they really just need kind of that validation. So that's really where I've found my niche with 2211.
And what kind of topics would you cover in that engagement?
Um, it's a lot. I mean, a lot of startups are using like dev shops. And so initially it's like, okay, what's your product roadmap? How are you going to get your MVP? How are you going to get
Dev shops being software development.
Yeah, yeah. So, how sustainable is that? How quickly can you move? Um, Getting them to understand what that path looks like is really important. We were all non-technical founders, and so a lot of people that I work with are that same, you know, they don't have the developer that's on their founding team, which does create a different path. Um, Raising money is a big one. Sales, I get identified a lot as somebody that understands how to navigate sales. We're very sales heavy. And so putting processes in place around sales is a big part of what I've helped people with. Um, and then I would say that talent, like looking through the talent projections around who you hire when and what roles you need, forecasting that is a big part of what we do.
Are you willing to speak if a university wants you to come and do a talk?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just want to make sure. What are some of the mistakes you see startups make early on?
I think a lot of people think they need to go raise a bunch of money, and they spend their time raising money and not building products. The biggest thing I see is the ego gets involved when you're building a product, and that's probably the number one thing I see is, being so tied into what you think the product should be and not listening to clients is where I see most startups go wrong. It truly is like you have to remove your ego and really listen to the users of your product to build the right thing. So a lot of that, just having those conversations.
Can you give an anonymized example of that?
Um, yeah. I was working with a software company that was building, it's in the healthcare space for um, caregivers, and it is very much just they're focused so much on what they think is needed and not actually taking into account like spending time with the caregivers to understand what the true need is. And then, if nobody's using it, it's not going to work. And so, really, listening to that. If nobody's using it, something's wrong. Um, and being able to pivot quick and just
Tell about LifeLoop, how you developed that product.
yeah. So we started it initially from a family member perspective. If anybody has a loved one that's been in senior living, which most people have, whether it's nursing home or private pay, it can be a hard transition. And so as a family, we felt out of the loop, and we really wanted a way to connect and understand what grandma had done that day, or the day before, or maybe what she hadn't done. Maybe she didn't go to lunch. And so, in effort to solve that small problem of family communication, we realized by going to the communities and spending time with the staff that the problem was much larger. They needed a large operational platform to help collect the data to then feed to families. So LifeLoop in the end ended up being, and is still, a very large platform that does all non-clinical operations and feeds that to family. Um, and then residents can also log in. So it's really a true platform for all audiences. But understanding why family didn't have that was what drove all the operational
And
tools.
when you started, what was really key was working with those facilities and pivoting when they gave you feedback.
Yeah, we did a lot wrong in the early days, and just really listening to them and realizing like we don't truly understand what their day to day is and what it ended up being. And I think this is very true in a lot of software, especially SaaS companies, is everybody has the same problem. They're solving it a different way. Most markets, most niches are looking for a best practice. And so to become that best practice for, whatever the industry is, it's truly understanding like how can you save them time, and what is the most efficient way to do stuff, which requires a lot of digging in and truly empathizing with how they're currently doing it,
I have
today.
one more question, and again, if anyone has questions, let me know in the chat, but what kind of advice do you have for young startup companies, particularly companies that are coming out of universities and have complex technology?
I stay close to the customer is like truly very, very critical. I think a lot of times things are built in a vacuum and then they get in the real world and it doesn't work. And so it's got to be iterative, and it just, slowly making little tweaks to make it the best experience is really key. So be client driven.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story and kind of how 2211 is working with companies. It's really a fresh new take, I think. So
Well,
thank
good. Yeah,
thank
it's been fun.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Um,
for having me.